In a twilight-lit valley strung between mountains of shimmering crystal, a lone figure stalked through the tall reeds. The air smelled faintly of quartz dust and distant incense, drifting from the huts and cottages of a peaceful town a mile away. The figure's silhouette moved swiftly, cloaked in black, with a hood crowned by a gleaming crystal sphere. He carried a sword with a white quartz blade, its hilt adorned with another crystal orb. This man was Scabbard Fang, a hybrid born of human flesh and thoughtform essence, and he was on the hunt. As always. He knelt by a shallow stream and studied footprints pressed into the mud. They were small and clawed, belonging to a magical creature he had been hired to exterminate. Property owners disliked magical creatures skulking around their farmland, gnawing on their livestock or lurking in barns. Scabbard Fang didn't ask questions. He needed the pay, and more importantly, he needed the negative energy contained in certain dangerous thought forms to survive. He disliked feeding on negative human emotions, they tasted sour and left him depressed, so he chose to feed on hostile magical creatures. It was a savage method, but it aligned with his worldview. All magical creatures were monstrous, including himself. Better to destroy them before they caused harm. He would prove his worth to humankind and also fill his belly with the essence he needed. Though he would never admit it aloud, he loathed the part of himself that was not human. He had inherited some intangible thoughtform lineage from his father, whom he had never met. It had left him with visible signs, faint whirls of dark energy patterns on the edges of his eyes, a subtle glow in his irises at night, and an unsettling aura that made even the bravest mercenaries edge away. Some people called him one of the good ones, as if he were an exception. The phrase made him cringe. He turned it over in his mind as he followed the tracks. But tonight was different. Rumors had been swirling that a number of magical creature hunters, men and women like himself, had started disappearing. Not dying in open battle, but vanishing without a trace. Scabbard Fang's imagination conjured a particularly ferocious magical creature behind it all, maybe a rare thoughtform beast that had grown cunning, a creature that might present a worthy challenge. The idea excited him grimly. He pictured a monstrous silhouette howling under the moon. That was something he could sink his blade into, something that could give him a real fight. He smirked at the thought. As he pressed deeper into the reeds, the silver moonlight suddenly caught on his blade. He paused, holding Dawn, his white quartz sword, up before him. The small crystal ball in its hilt glinted gently. Within that crystal ball lived a life force magic master, a projected memory who could teach healing arts. When Scabbard Fang whispered the right words, Dawn's life force master would guide him, letting him channel healing energy into himself or others. He found it ironic that he, a hunter of magical creatures, carried a healing blade. But he had his reasons. Sometimes, the innocent got caught in the crossfire. His other magical item, Shade, the black cloak he wore, rustled softly. Sewn into the hood was another tiny sphere. Within it dwelled a life force magic master who could teach him the art of traveling between universes contained in crystal balls. This allowed him to vanish into the cloak's dimension and reappear moments later. It had saved his life countless times, letting him dodge lethal strikes or disappear from the jaws of rampaging beasts. Scabbard pressed a finger against Dawn's crystal hilt. "Show me insight," he muttered. He focused on his life force, the subtle hum beneath his ribcage. His average measurement hovered around 100, like most beings. Still, he was slightly more attuned, more aware of his metaphysical essence. The faint voice within Dawn spoke to him, a whisper of comfort and clarity. Its presence allowed him to sense faint traces of life force in the environment. He felt something, residual, a scattering of spiritual crumbs. There had been a struggle here recently. He frowned. No body, no blood, just a feeling of something missing. A scream in the distance tore him from his reverie. He sprang from the reeds, sprinting toward a cluster of lantern lights. As he approached, he saw 3 hunters, all heavily armed, standing before a slight human figure. The figure was a woman in a plain cloak, holding something odd, a doll with a crystal sphere for a head. The hunters sneered. They were known to be ruthless, men who took pleasure in tormenting weaker magical creatures. But as Scabbard Fang watched, the woman calmly lowered the doll, and something shifted. He crouched low behind a boulder and observed carefully. The woman was too calm, almost unnaturally so. She projected an aura of quiet determination. One of the hunters lunged forward with a mace. "Don't try anything, miss." The hunter snarled. "We know you summoned us here to look into these vanishings. Speak up. What's your angle?" The woman said nothing. She merely tilted the doll so that its crystal ball head caught the moonlight. Scabbard Fang felt a tingle in his life force, as if the magic in the air were thickening. The 3 hunters stiffened. They sensed it too. One cursed under his breath. Suddenly, the woman sprang into action. She shouted, "Prisms binding!" and held the doll high. The crystal head glowed with prismatic intensity. A wave of telekinetic force rippled out, invisible but palpable. The hunters stumbled, their weapons shaking. Scabbard Fang's eyes widened. He watched their life force signatures flicker in and out of clarity as if something were tugging at them. The woman's face hardened with effort. "Get away from me," cried one of the hunters, a tall man with a crossbow. He fired a bolt. The bolt froze midair and shattered into glittering dust. Another hunter tried to charge her with a spear, only to be lifted from the ground by an unseen hand. He screamed as he was thrown headlong into an unseen fissure. No, not a fissure, but a shimmering distortion in the air, like a hole into another crystal ball universe. The hunter vanished. The third hunter tried to run, but the woman's eyes flashed with telekinetic fury. "Prism's life force prison," she cried. The doll's crystal ball radiated rainbow hues. The hunter gasped, clawing at his chest as if something were tearing at his heart. He stumbled and fell forward, then simply vanished, sucked into the crystal sphere's internal universe, trapped behind telekinetic barriers. The remaining hunter, terrified, fell to his knees, begging for mercy. Scabbard Fang understood now. This unassuming human was no human at all. She was the force behind the vanished hunters. She was something else. He narrowed his eyes, quietly drawing dawn. He felt hungry. This was no ordinary magical creature. She had powers far beyond a simple predator's cunning. She had technique. She had planning. She was dangerous. Perfect. Before he could intervene, the woman turned her attention to the last hunter. Her voice was surprisingly gentle. "Why do you hunt magical creatures?" she asked, almost softly. "Do you see them as nothing more than monsters?" Her eyes glowed subtly, and there was a sadness in them that unsettled Scabbard. The hunter stammered, I. They pay me. I don't hate them. It's just a job, I swear." She raised the doll again. "It's always just a job, isn't it? Always a convenient excuse to harm those who look different," she sighed. "I will not kill you. But I cannot let you harm my kind anymore." "Your kind?" the hunter whispered, wide-eyed. "Yes," she said. "I am Track Core, a positive thought form. I protect magical creatures." With that, she slammed the doll forward, imprisoning Prism's radiant cage. A brilliant burst of color lit the night. The hunter screamed as he was sucked into the crystal sphere's internal dimension, his life force forcibly guided by telekinesis into that sealed world. Track Core lowered the doll, breathing heavily. She seemed exhausted but triumphant. Scabbard Fang clenched his teeth. So this was the culprit. He had expected some mindless beast, but he had found a thought form who fought back against those who preyed on her kin. The thought made him uneasy. He had always considered magical creatures beneath contempt, but this one was methodical. She was creating her own miniature universe of imprisoned hunters. What was her goal? He felt a stir of something he rarely acknowledged: sympathy. Humans did treat magical creatures poorly. He himself had benefited from people's admiration simply because he hunted other creatures, making him one of the good ones. He shook his head. No, he wouldn't let this confuse him. He was here to stop whatever was making hunters vanish. Track Core was just another magical creature, albeit a clever one. He stepped forward, allowing the moon to illuminate his hybrid features. "You," he called, pointing dawn at Track Core. "You're the one making hunters vanish, aren't you?" Track Core tensed, turning to face him. She saw his blade, his cloak, the faint thought form markings. Her eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "Scabbard Fang," he replied. "Huntsman, mage, and..." He paused, "a half-breed. I've come to put an end to these disappearances." Track Core studied him. Something about him was unusual. He smelled faintly of negative life force, but not the rotting kind. More like he carried conflict within himself. Why would a hybrid work with humans to kill his own kind? She asked quietly. Scabbard Fang's jaw tightened. "They're not my kind. I don't care what I'm half made of. I won't let magical creatures terrorize humans." Track Core snorted softly. "Terrorize? They are hunted, tortured, and driven away from their homes. And yet you call them the terrorists." She raised Prism again. "I tire of this hypocrisy." Scabbard Fang bared his teeth. "I'm not like those other hunters. I do this for my own reasons." He started to circle her. "You're powerful, I'll grant you that, but you won't be capturing me so easily." Track Core's eyes flashed. She considered appearing human again. Her special technique allowed her to shapeshift into any human form she'd studied closely. But here, under the moonlight, there was no point. Instead, she let her positive thought form energy swirl around her. It shimmered in pastel hues, gentle yet resolute. You won't be allowed to continue harming my kin. Scabbard Fang crouched low. He touched Shade's crystal ball with his free hand. Shade's vanishing gait, he shouted, and his body flickered, merging momentarily with the pocket universe inside the cloak's crystal. The cloak remained suspended in mid-air, empty, a black shape drifting like a ghost. Then Scabbard reappeared behind Track Core, blade raised high. Dawn's life force slash. Track Core pivoted, eyes widened. She recognized life force magic swirling around the blade. She lifted Prism and shouted, "Prism's barrier." The doll's head glowed, forming a telekinetic shell. Sparks flew as Dawn's blade crashed against the barrier, sending out shimmering waves of life force energy. Each wave distorted the air, creating momentary glimpses of tiny crystal universes nested within others. Scabbard Fang pushed harder, channeling more life force through Dawn. He felt his heart pounding. Pushing too much life force could overwhelm him, shock his body. He needed caution. Track Core grit her teeth. She had spent decades imagining peaceful worlds inside crystal balls, using projection magic to create gentle realities. But none of those worlds mattered if this one stayed cruel. She had learned telekinetic magic from Prism's master inside the doll. That master had taught her the cruel art of imprisoning life force. It was not a gentle technique, but a necessary weapon against hunters. Now she was using it against a hybrid who seemed oddly conflicted. She sidestepped, allowing Scabbard's blade to slice just past her. "Telekinetic ripple," she cried, lifting her free hand. Waves of life force laced telekinesis rolled out, pushing Scabbard Fang back. He skidded across the ground, boots kicking up dust. He growled and forced himself forward, sacrificing a trickle of his own life force to strengthen his muscles. With a grunt, he swung Dawn in a diagonal arc. "Dawn's cleansing light," he shouted, channeling a special technique he had learned from the master inside the sword's crystal. A beam of concentrated healing life force energy, ironically capable of scorching foes, erupted from the blade. Normally, healing energy was gentle, but by forcing it outward rapidly, he could burn like a sunbeam. Track Core crossed her arms and poured telekinetic force outward. The beam collided with her shield, and for a moment, they both struggled, pushing their energies against each other, lighting the night sky with bizarre and brilliant radiance. In that clash, Scabbard Fang observed Track Core carefully. She was strong, clever, and determined, but not malicious in the way he had expected. She was precise, capturing hunters, not slaughtering them. Why? If she hated humans, why not kill them outright? He found himself wondering what drove her so fiercely. Track Core strained. Her telekinetic barriers wavered under the assault. She cursed under her breath. She had imprisoned many hunters recently, each time using life force to maintain those crystal prisons. It was draining her. She needed to end this quickly. Summoning Prism's power, she shouted, "Prism's life force displacement." Scabbard Fang felt a sudden tug at his chest. He recognized the technique. It threatened to pull his life force into a crystal ball trap. He snarled, forcing himself to counter with life force magic. He visualized his energy as a stable core, and with a roar, he pushed back. "Nobody traps me," he spat, pressing a hand to Shade's crystal ball. Shade's escape route. His body flickered again, parts of him fading into the cloak's realm. He slipped the telekinetic pull by temporarily existing partially in another crystal ball universe. Then he re-emerged, panting but intact, a safe distance away. Track Core's frustration mounted. She realized he was no ordinary hunter. He was a hybrid with mastery over life force magic and at least some projection or scrying capabilities. He also carried 2 magic items, each containing masters. That made him formidable. Her heart wavered. Was he truly just another enemy? Scabbard Fang took a deep breath. He remembered the first time he had tested his abilities, the confusion he'd felt about his identity. Back then, he believed firmly that all magical creatures were irredeemable. But seeing Track Core's conflicted gaze, hearing the sadness in her voice, he felt a subtle shift in his conviction. She had captured hunters, yes, but had she killed them? Perhaps she was trying to protect her kind in the only way she knew. The realization unsettled him, chipping away at the foundation of his beliefs. He steadied himself. "Why do you do this?" he demanded. "Why not just kill them?" Track Core lowered Prism slightly, eyes narrowing. "I do not want more death. I just want them to stop hunting us. Inside these crystal prisons, they can do no harm. Maybe in time, I can teach them empathy." She sounded uncertain, as if not entirely convinced by her own plan. Scabbard Fang blinked. This wasn't at all what he expected. He had come expecting a monster, a mindless creature reveling in blood and chaos. Instead, he found a thought form with ideals, someone who projected worlds of peace inside crystal balls. He tried to picture her worlds, gentle utopias hidden away in layers of glass. Could that really change anything? He shook his head. He was faltering. He had a job to do. The local authorities wanted the culprit found and stopped. He tightened his grip on Dawn. "Your method still harms people," he said. "You're no saint, thought form." "I never claimed to be a saint," Track Core replied, voice quiet. "I am what I must be to protect my kind." They stood at an impasse. Neither moved for a few tense moments, life force energies swirling invisibly between them. The distant sound of a river trickled through the reeds. High above, innumerable crystal ball stars flickered. If one had scrying magic, they could stare into those stars and see countless universes nested within. Neither of them realized how many worlds were watching them, how the great multiverse of crystal spheres swirled around their conflict, indifferent and eternal. Scabbard Fang's eyes drifted to the doll, Prism. That was her secret weapon, a magic item holding knowledge of imprisoning techniques. He wondered if he could disarm her. But that would mean drawing closer into a direct clash, something risky now that he knew her techniques. Still, part of him craved the fight. He wanted to see what she could really do. He smirked, letting his old instincts take hold. Maybe if he fought her at full force, he'd understand her better. Perhaps in conflict, truth would emerge. Without another word, he lunged forward. Track Core expected this. She summoned positive thought form energy from within her core, compressing it with telekinetic magic. "Formless manifestation," she shouted. Her own body glowed as she condensed intangible essence into a physical shield, an iridescent shell that wrapped around her torso and arms. When Scabbard Fang's blade struck, it bounced off with a crack of sparks. She spun under his guard and slammed a telekinetic pulse into his side. He winced, sliding back, but quickly retaliated. "Dawn's healing shockwave," he cried, swinging his sword in a wide arc. Unlike his earlier beam, this technique created a burst of healing energy mixed with aggressive life force vibrations. The energy wouldn't restore Track Core's health, but it rattled her senses, pushing her back. She gasped as her form shimmered, nearly losing solidity. Scabbard Fang seized the moment. He drew upon Shade's master's teachings and whispered a mantra, channeling life force magic to increase his own vitality. His life force rose above its normal level, approaching 120, then 130. It hummed inside him, making him stronger, sharper. His body trembled slightly at the sudden surge. He knew too high a leap might shock him. But he needed the edge. Track Core gritted her teeth. She recognized a life force surge and knew he'd grown stronger. She cursed silently. She considered using her transformation technique. Though not fully developed, she could temporarily increase her own life force to shape her form into a known human body. It would be a psychological ploy more than anything else. Could that throw him off? "Human guys," she shouted. Her thought form energy shimmered, and before Scabbard's eyes, her shape altered. Her hair turned auburn, her features softened, her clothing shifted to a familiar style of a local villager he had seen earlier in the day, a kind human girl who had offered him water by the roadside. Track Core had studied that girl carefully, and now she replicated her form perfectly. Her eyes even carried the same gentle spark. Scabbard Fang faltered. His blade lowered a fraction. What trick is this? He remembered that girl. She had been kind, unafraid of him despite his hybrid features. Seeing her image now unsettled him, made his chest ache with confusion. Track Core used the distraction. "Prism's overwhelming extraction," she cried, raising the doll. She focused on a portion of Scabbard Fang's life force, trying to tug it into a crystal ball inside Prism. A rainbow beam shot forth, illuminating the space between them. But Scabbard Fang rallied. "No," he roared, summoning all his will. He refused to be manipulated. He remembered that kindness, yes, but he also remembered what he was, a hunter, a survivor. He channeled his life force into telekinetic magic, something he rarely did, and tried to disperse her energy. He was no master of telekinetics, but he had enough skill to attempt something risky. "Dawn Shade Fusion Technique, Life Force Sever," he yelled, combining the healing knowledge from Dawn and the traveling knowledge from Shade into a single risky gambit. He attempted to sever the telekinetic link Track Core established, using healing energy to calm the strands of force and using dimensional slipping to confuse the lock her magic held on him. The beam faltered, scattering harmlessly into motes of light. Track Core's eyes widened in surprise. He had created a fusion technique on the fly, an unorthodox move. This hunter was truly dangerous. Yet, in that moment of shock and awe, she also felt something else: respect. He was no mindless killer either. He fought with cunning and restraint. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was not beyond understanding. For Scabbard Fang, this ordeal rattled his convictions. He had seen Track Core hesitate, refuse to kill, use imprisonment over slaughter, adopt a familiar kind face. He realized she truly desired peace, even if her method was flawed. Meanwhile, he had always insisted all magical creatures were monsters. But was he not the monster here, hunting for pay and feeding on negative thought forms? Wasn't Track Core's goal ultimately more noble than his work for hire hunting? He shook his head as if to clear it. Track Core, he said, voice low. This won't end well for either of us if we keep fighting. I know what you're doing, but what's your end goal? Keep imprisoning hunters until there are none left outside? Track Core panted, sweat beading on her borrowed human brow. She let the gaze fade, returning to her natural luminous thoughtform shape, humanoid but ethereal, with gentle eyes and shimmering skin. I want a world where magical creatures and humans coexist. If I can show these hunters other worlds, worlds I have created inside crystal balls, maybe I can change their hearts. She gestured toward Prism. In those miniature worlds, I project utopias. If they watch long enough, maybe they'll learn compassion. Scabbard Fang clenched his fist. Her methods were radical and perhaps naive, but not entirely evil. He looked down at Dawn's blade, seeing his reflection. Half human, half thought form, hated by both sides. He fed on negative energy, a truth he despised. But here it was a positive thought form trying to do something constructive, albeit forcefully. It made him question his own role in this cycle of violence. I never thought about it that way, he said slowly. I've always seen magical creatures as threats. But if you can imagine better worlds, maybe you're not the monster I took you for. Track Core's guarded stance softened slightly. And you? Are you going to try to kill me now? He sheathed Dawn slowly. If I did, what would that make me? Another hunter too blind to see reason? He laughed harshly. I was hired to solve the mystery of disappearing hunters. I never imagined the culprit would be doing it for some kind of peaceful cause. She lowered Prism as well. Silence stretched between them. The moon drifted behind a cloud, dimming the scene. Neither knew how to proceed. They had clashed violently, but now understanding stood between them, fragile and tentative. Scabbard Fang finally broke the silence. I can't just let you keep doing this. I was tasked with stopping it. But maybe I can find another way. Track Core nodded slowly. I'm tired of conflict, too. Imprisoning them seemed less cruel than killing. But maybe I should try talking to people openly. If I show my true form, though, will they listen? She doubted it. Humans feared thought forms and other magical creatures. They called them beasts and abominations. Scabbard Fang grimaced. He remembered how people sometimes said he was one of the good ones, lumping all non-humans together. Perhaps that ignorance was the root problem. He met Track Core's eyes. Listen, he said quietly, I don't know if this world can change easily. But maybe we can start small. Release a few hunters, see if they've learned anything. If they haven't, well. He didn't finish the sentence. Track Core considered him. This was a strange alliance forming, one neither had asked for. But perhaps it was a start. I'll think about it, she said. But I won't just let them go without some sign that they've changed. Scabbard Fang nodded. Fair enough. He was still uneasy. His whole life, he had considered himself separate from magical creatures. But now he found himself standing on common ground with one. He understood now why he had always felt so hollow. His hatred had roots in self-loathing. Perhaps not all magical creatures were bad. Perhaps he wasn't bad either. That thought rattled him more than any blow in their earlier fight. A distant rustling made them both turn. In the reeds, something stirred. Negative thought forms, attracted by the recent flares of emotional and magical energy, had begun to gather. They were invisible to the naked eye, but their presence hummed in the air. Scabbard Fang felt his stomach growl. He hated that he needed them, hated that he survived by feeding off their negativity. But better to consume these lurking thought forms than to skulk among humans for their sorrow or fear. Track Core sensed them too. She was skilled in telekinetic magic, and if she concentrated, she might condense one into a visible shape. It seems we're not alone, she said warily. Scabbard Fang sighed. They're negative thought forms. I feed on them. Don't judge me, he added bitterly. Track Core shook her head. I'm not judging. We all have our needs. Some feed on sunlight, others on emotions. It's the way of the multiverse. He smirked, stepping forward. He raised his hand and focused on life force magic. I can make this quick. With a subtle application of telekinetic magic, though he was no master, he tugged at the intangible forms. He exerted his will, forcing one to condense. "Come forth, negative shade," he yelled, and with a shimmer, a small creature formed, a writhing mass of inky darkness with fanged jaws. Track Core drew a sharp breath. She raised Prism, ready to help, but Scabbard Fang grinned wolfishly for the first time. "This is where I excel." He slashed with Dawn, cutting through the creature's intangible essence. Dawn's life force-infused blade let him sever its energy. With a hiss, the negative thought form dissipated, and Scabbard Fang absorbed a portion of its leftover energy to sustain himself. Track Core watched silently. She found it sad that he had to feed this way, but at least he harmed only creatures who preyed on negative emotions. When it was over, Scabbard Fang exhaled, looking more energized. "That's done," he said. He glanced at her. "Your ideals are complicated, Track Core. I can't say I fully support kidnapping hunters, but I understand why you did it." Track Core looked down at Prism's crystal head. Inside that tiny universe, several hunters floated, trapped behind telekinetic barriers, forced to witness peaceful worlds. She wondered if their hearts would ever soften. Perhaps with time, and maybe some direct interaction, she could teach them another way. She looked at Scabbard Fang. "If you truly understand, will you stand aside? Let me try my methods. I promise no one will be killed." Scabbard Fang hesitated. He had a duty. But what was duty compared to his shifting understanding of right and wrong? He'd always done as he was paid. Now, for the first time, he questioned that. "I can stall the authorities," he said slowly. "Tell them I need more time to track you down. But you must promise me that if your efforts fail, you'll consider a different approach. If these hunters never learn, you can't keep them trapped forever." Track Core nodded. "I promise. I just need time. I'll use projection magic to show them countless worlds of harmony. Perhaps that will awaken their empathy." Scabbard Fang sheathed his sword. The tension ebbed. He wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing, but his worldview had already begun to shift. Maybe all creatures were not as simple as he'd believed. Maybe he himself could do more good than just killing. He turned to go, but paused. "If you're caught, I won't be able to protect you," he warned. "They see you as a monster. They see me as a useful tool. Neither perception is correct. Let's hope we can change that." Track Core offered a faint smile. "I'll try. And Scabbard Fang, I hope we meet again in a better context. I would like to show you one of my peaceful worlds someday." He nodded, saying nothing. His heart churned with newfound doubts and curiosities. Maybe after all this, he would take the time to study a crystal ball's interior universe, to see what possibilities lay inside. He had never truly mastered scrying magic, but perhaps he should learn. If Track Core could envision kinder realities, maybe he could too. As he turned back toward the distant town, he noticed distant torchlights bobbing. The authorities, maybe. He'd have to concoct a story. Perhaps he'd say the culprit was elusive, that he needed special equipment to track it. He would buy Track Core time. He felt conflicted but oddly hopeful. He no longer felt entirely alone in his identity. There were others who bridged worlds, who dared to imagine new possibilities. Behind him, Track Core watched him go. She felt the weight of her imprisoned hunters and knew the path ahead would be long and uncertain. Still, she had gained something tonight, a hint that not all who hunted magical creatures were irredeemable. Maybe this half-human, half-thought-form hunter would one day become an ally. Maybe he would even help her negotiate peace. The night sky shimmered with myriad crystal universes, each one a world unto itself. In one distant crystal ball lay a legend of how Track Core and Scabbard Fang came to possess their magic items and learn their first special techniques. In another awaited a future conflict that would test the fragile understanding they'd forged tonight. The multiverse stretched on, full of infinite stories. Scabbard Fang reached the edge of the valley and turned one last time, seeing Track Core's faint silhouette. He remembered the kind villager's face she had mimicked, and he wondered if that kindness could be real in this world, not just in some imagined crystal universe. He promised himself he would try to find out. Unbeknownst to them both, deep within the chain of universes, older gods and masters of all four key types of magic watched their struggles. They smiled, amused and curious, for the events of tonight were but a fragment of a grand tapestry. This encounter would echo into future battles and negotiations, and its seeds lay in an older story long past, one that neither Scabbard Fang nor Track Core fully remembered. As the moon dipped below the crystal mountains, leaving the valley in quiet darkness, the stage was set for greater challenges to come, and for the peaceful worlds imagined inside glittering crystal balls to one day become reality.